So we're here with Claudia and Chris to talk a little bit about support groups. So I'd like both of you to introduce yourselves. You, Claudia Richards, you are the local support coordinator for Oxford.
That's
Tell
right.
me just a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm an MDS patient, which occasionally surprises people who contact me because they think I'm somehow an official. And being a patient, I think, enables them to be a little more open, probably. I first went along to the support group when I'd been referred to Oxford. It had had one meeting before I arrived, and so I can't claim to have started it in any way, shape or form, but they were looking for a volunteer to help coordinate it in order to relieve the nurse who was doing so at the time. And I'm just one of those people who always volunteers for things. So I and one other patient said we would help the successor to that research nurse to help coordinate the group, and that's been the case for the last 7 or 8 years now.
And you've been a patient for how long?
I've been a patient for 10 years shortly. Yes.
Okay, treated in Oxford.
I'm treated both in my local haematology department and also was then referred to Oxford with a view to entering a clinical trial.
And you are a staunch member of the MDS UK committee as well. So if I turn to you, Chris.
Yes, hi.
Dugmore, hello. So same question to you. You're a committee member of MDS UK and a patient. Tell me a little bit more about you.
I was diagnosed 11 years ago, just over 11 years ago, at which time I think that the support group didn't even really exist or was just about coming into existence. So there's very little information, very little support out there, and it was a very scary time. I was lucky in as much as a year later things had started happening support-wise, and I think you invited me to a support group meeting in Cambridge, in the Oxford Aircraft Museum of all places, led by the person who was currently the chairman, David Hall. And the difference in me, in going to that meeting, I went in very wobbly, very fearful, and there were probably about 20 people there with varying different types of MDS. Most of whom have had it for several years, and I was just impressed by how they were all dealing with it, how they were responding to their treatments. Following on from that meeting, I sort of started emailing a couple of people in the group with whom I had things in common, and I found that really, really helpful, just to sort of touch base with other people, because I'd had this a year by this time and not been able to speak to anybody with MDS. And so as the years went on, I did start having my treatment at Addenbrooke, so obviously I was able to go to the Cambridge meetings, but I started thinking, what about all the other poor so-and-sos like I was in Essex, where I live, who don't get any support at all. So I thought it might be a good idea to sort of set up a group, and with your help and support I set one up from scratch really, and obviously there are issues to do with setting up a group from scratch, but it has now been going for 7 years. The last meeting we had, there were 31 people there, which was the biggest yet. So yeah, I'm very pleased with how it's going, and we've seen lots of people come to the group and I think derive benefit from it. So.
And just to add also, you're an MDS patient, but your type of MDS is CMML.
Yes, it's called CMML, and it's an even rarer type than MDS. I think MDS is still about 3,500 people newly diagnosed. 2,500. And for CMML it's only 500, so even within MDS it's quite a rarity. So It's very unusual for me to meet somebody with my particular subgroup, but obviously it has lots of similarities with other aspects of MDS. So the MDS support group is where I've homed myself. I've made a home with it.
Great. How did both support groups start and develop further? So Claudia, how did you touched a little bit earlier on the first steps, but can you tell us more about how the group developed, perhaps, in Oxford?
Yes, I would say the numbers have stayed fairly stable in terms of how many members or partners, friends come along to each meeting. There are some people who've been coming for a very long time. There are generally most meetings we have some newly diagnosed patients, and it's really encouraging to see people grow in confidence to talk about the issues that they're facing in their everyday life as a result of the diagnosis, and to be able to sort of be living proof to the newly diagnosed members that there is life within MDS. Obviously we're all dealing with different aspects of it, but generally speaking there's some points where different patients meet in terms of what they're going through, and that's particularly true with some of the people who've gone for transplant, and we have some very successful transplant patients who still maintain their links with the group and come along to meetings, and it's really good to see people who come into the group and have been having that conversation with their clinician about whether this might be an option for them, to be able to talk on a one-to-one basis with somebody who knows exactly what it's like to have a transplant in that centre. And likewise with people who come a little bit reluctantly maybe, or a little bit apprehensively I should say, you can see them visibly relax when they realise that they're in a comfortable situation where there's no pressure on them to say more than they feel ready to at that time. And as they come to more and more meetings, they generally are more and more willing to share information with others because they feel comfortable, they recognise people from previous meetings and so on. I must say that the fact that we meet in the Maggie's Centre in Oxford is a wonderful bonus because it's on the campus where the haematology and cancer department is, but you wouldn't think you were in a hospital when you're actually sitting there in the meeting room. It's like a tree house. And so the environment in which you're sitting really helps you to feel at ease, and that you're not discussing a clinical matter, you are discussing just a normal, everyday human condition. And the staff are wonderful and welcoming, and you can visibly see people, you can see the tension easing away from them. And some people who at the beginning of a meeting maybe are quite limited in what they want to offer in terms of personal information. By the end, when we've all had a laugh together, which I think is very therapeutic, and occasionally a few tears, which also in its own way is therapeutic, are willing to really go into quite a lot of detail and to sit back in the chair and really make themselves at home. We do have clinical members of the clinical team who come in to talk to us from time to time. That always brings out a bumper attendance. But I have to say that other meetings are equally as valuable where you are sharing on a one-to-one basis, or you have input maybe from an expert in fatigue management or nutrition, we had a wonderful meeting with a member of the pastoral team there, and people really opened up to her and shared a lot more than they had done at other meetings. The chaplaincy team, that was the word I was searching for, which wouldn't come. So I think the group is almost cyclical, if you like, because people don't necessarily come for years on end. They come when they feel the need, and we can repeat certain topics that would be of help to them.
Chris, same question to you. There must be some things that resonate for you as well. What do you see in the Essex region? How do the patients respond, or the caregivers as well, the spouses of or children of patients? How do they?
Well, I think as Claudia says, when people first come in, they're quite apprehensive, as anybody would be in going to any kind of a new group with new people. But sometimes what happens is that there has been developing a core of people. I sometimes call them our old members, but then they say, oh, you know, our longer attending members. And because they come quite regularly and they form that core, you know, people recognise the same faces each time. So even if you do get new people, there's that core of people that know each other and have heard what their issues are with MDS. So I think, you know, as Claudia says, what happens is that people come in sort of quite apprehensive, but you see from meeting to meeting changes in people. I can think of one man came in and his wife came up to me and said he is so anxious about this, he just cannot function because he's just worrying about it all the time. Well, you know, I think he's been to 4 meetings now. It's a different man that walks in smiling, talking about his hobbies, what he's getting up to, and I think that's partly, you know, it's partly a process. That doesn't happen straight away. I mean, certainly with my own MDS, it is a process. It takes time for you to get to that position of living with the disease rather than just worrying about it all the time. And I think that's what you sort of see in the support group, this gradual change in people. And I think that helps. And there is humour there. And I think the more people get to know each other, I mean, I lead the meetings, and you know, I make sort of quite a few jokes, and people just warm to it, you know, because yes, there's nothing funny about the situation that we're being in, but people can see humorous aspects to it. And we've even discussed things like, so are there any benefits to MDS? And people have found, you know, lots of benefits. You know, exploring how it's meant that their family have become closer and they've become more valued, and you know, they're enjoying life more because it's become more valuable to them. So, you know, we do touch on things like that. But something I was going to say again about sort of setting up groups, I think something that's important is the logistics of it all. You know, you've got to, Oxford are very lucky because they have this centre. We've had to move around to different venues. They haven't all been ideal, but geographically I've tried. Essex is a very big county. I think it might be one of the biggest counties in terms of miles travelled between north and south. But you know, you can't expect people who are struggling with an illness to travel for much more than an hour without it having an effect on them. So finding somewhere central, finding somewhere that's comfortable and doesn't feel like a hospital, I think that's important. What about the days, you know? Are there any of the members that are still working and can't come in the day, or people who work part-time and can't come on Tuesdays unless there's an hour in the month or something? And the logistics of it all is quite challenging, because obviously there will be people having treatments, there will be people having azacitidine, 7 days in every 28. You may have several people in your group and they won't all be on the same cycle. There'll be people who are having blood transfusions or clinical appointments which they clearly don't want to miss. So, you know, finding a day when the optimum number of people there, that's quite a challenge in itself. So, you know, there are quite a lot of factors involved in trying to get a group going, keeping it going, and keeping people sort of coming back for as long as they feel they need to. And as Claudia said, for some people it may just be enough to go once or twice, just to know there's other people out there suffering the same issues. For other people, they do like to touch base a lot more often.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Chris and Claudia, tell us a little bit more about the benefits of attending local support group meetings. So there is a cumulative effect that happens in local groups. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, well, as we were talking about earlier, there's a little bit of apprehension that is quite natural when people first come. They gradually over time become much more confident in talking about their disease and about living with it or the treatments that they are having. And then with time, when new people join the group, they benefit from that confidence that has grown in that person, and they can then be the supporter to the new person who comes with their fears and issues about having been given this diagnosis. And so people grow, the group grows with its sort of global knowledge, I suppose, in a way. And I think there's strength to be derived from that, because people go away feeling that they've been given information, they've been given support, psychological, emotional, and from all aspects of being someone living with MDS.
Chris, do you see that in
Yes,
the journey of the patient?
I think something else that happens is that you know, a lot of the idea of going to a support group is getting increased personal knowledge about how to cope and how to live with the disease. So there's quite a lot of sharing tips and sharing, well, you know, I just have to have a nap in the afternoons now. And it gives other people permission. They say, oh, I'm not the only one who has to give in and have a nap in the afternoon. Or one of our people has just got an electric bike at the age of 80, and he said, oh, you know, it was very hard that I had to get an electric bike. And everybody else is thinking, wow, I wish I was still riding my bike at 80. You know, so there's lots of sharing of very practical things which people can identify with and use to their advantage, you know, ways of coping with fatigue that people have found. And, you know, it's very encouraging when you hear people say things and you think, oh, well, that's given me permission to do that then. You know, I don't feel so bad now that I feel like this. And then the other interesting thing is that sometimes there are partners there who are not the MDS people, and they will say, well, I feel like that, and I've got nothing wrong with me. So, you know, that makes people feel a lot better. So I think there's an awful lot of that very basic, practical sharing of information that people find helpful.
So it's both an emotional journey, a practical journey. The person coming the first time will change over time, 3 months, 6 months, a year down the line, and the group is there to support. And the patient or the caregiver is there to become a supporter after having received that support. Great. Let's talk a little bit about practical aspects of setting up a group. You've both been running the groups, your individual groups, for several years, but for somebody who's interested in starting a group from scratch, so us as the MDS UK head office, we provide some support, some assistance, and what we require to start a group is, first of all, an enthusiastic patient or caregiver of a patient, a helpful clinician as well, and a location where meetings can take place. You've both been doing that. What can a little bit be the hurdles or the successes of setting up groups like that? Claudia, do you?
Well, I think the Oxford group is the second longest running after the one at King's, if I'm not mistaken. And so we do have peaks and troughs, and we then experimented with an alternative venue and an alternative time of day. It didn't actually bring any results. So on the whole, we find that if we say this is our day for meeting is a Friday, as it happens, and it's always at this time, then people know that that's when the meeting is available for them. Perhaps they can be a bit flexible in if they're still at work or if they have other commitments. And so as a result of that, we stick to that. We have moved around venues in the hospital, and I have to say that a meeting room in the hospital and a porter cabin were nowhere near as nice as the current venue that we have. And we are really indebted to the advanced nurse practitioner for myeloid disorders, Kirsty, who makes the bookings and also books the speakers, because obviously she has access to people within the hospitals. And I generally maintain communication with the members, and often there are things that the clinical team there or Kirsty herself wish to make the membership aware of. So there are emails that go out, periodically to say this is happening, or could you try this? Could you give us your opinion of that? And so I'm a listening ear for people if they want a phone call or if they want an email exchange, and I do try and keep it on a personal basis, one-to-one with people who are on my email list. And I also get the occasional referral from the office, and most of those people are very happy to have a telephone call and have a bit of a chat before they come along, which helps to allay some of those misgivings and apprehensions that we talked about.
Yeah, we certainly refer people to the group once they've become members. And that's quite important, and we send out invitation to all the group meetings. Chris, what's your experience of how the group started and what you need to do to keep the group going?
Well, I think it's important to say there are different models of how people do coordinate groups depending on, their own time available and their own sort of skill sets. In the case of Essex, I do personally invite all the people who are registered within that area. Usually they will come to me with information from the main office that there is a new member. As soon as there is a new member, I will try to make contact either by email or phone, and just so that the people are aware that if they get an email from me, it's not spam or junk or whatever, and so that they have sort of touch base. A lot of people also will ring me as soon as they become members, because they'll have got information about the group from the information pack. So that's a good opportunity to have a chat to someone. They're usually only sort of too willing to sort of talk about their situation, especially if they've just been diagnosed. Obviously, none of us can offer any medical information, but it's just being supportive, really. And thereafter, once people are invited, I add them to my little list. I've got a little list. And if they wish to not be on the list, they're taken off the list, so I don't invite them if for any reason it's not their thing, it's not their cup of tea, or they've got serious difficulties in attending meetings, I don't want to keep sort of badgering them and saying, "Oh, come along," when they know that it's difficult for them. So once people are on that invitation list, then I will ask them to every meeting if there's any information that comes up, say MDS Awareness Week or day or something. I'll send them information. If there's anything come up at a meeting, often at meetings they say, "Oh, I never know what questions to ask," so I might send out the question prompt list or something. So I am trying to keep in touch with people in between meetings as well as just before the meeting. So I do micromanage that myself, but other people may not want to do that. It's just that I want people to be aware and not feel so apprehensive that they've got someone who is sort of familiar to them, even if only through an email. So.
Absolutely. But there's, as you say, there's different models, and for people who want to maybe start a group, they can know that they can do as little or as much as they can or as they wish. There's no absolute perfect model, and we can modulate.
And it's fair to say that if I had somebody like Kirst, if I had a clinical nurse specialist who would do this, I'd be only too happy for them to do it. But unfortunately, I just don't have anybody who can help me do that. So if I didn't do it.
Each region has its own way of keeping the group going, but bottom line is patients and caregivers need to come and benefit from the group, and the rest happens automatically, I think. Okay, thank you very much, Chris and Claudia. That's been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.